Now, by the way, anytime you hear the United States government talking about wiretap, a wiretap requires a court order. Nothing has changed, by the way.
The president announced to the nation in December that his administration had been carrying out wiretapping on the American public without warrants. That is, he had been listening in, the NSA had been listening in on calls between Americans and people overseas without ever seeking a court order to justify it. This kind of program is unquestionably illegal. When Congress passed the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act in 1978, they said explicitly that there should be no wiretapping without court orders and no wiretapping outside of the bounds of the statutes that Congress had set up to allow it. Now, in some ways, this makes this the clearest argument for an impeachable offense because there's an actual crime here. When Congress passed the FISA, it said that it would be a felony to carry out wiretapping outside of its bounds. But we've always thought that in order to have an impeachable offense, having a crime simply isn't enough by itself. It ought to be the sort of crime that has a tendency to undermine the political system, to undermine democracy. So in that sense, it's helpful to look a little bit at what the motivations of the administration might have been to carry out this kind of wiretapping. The first one that they've offered, the first defense they've offered has been that the FISA court process is just too slow. But under FISA, they can put a wiretap in place and then, within 72 hours, go to the court and get retroactive authorization for it. And there's nothing faster than a retroactive warrant. Similarly, they've argued that somehow the authorization to use military force in Afghanistan justifies this kind of wiretapping. But that authorization says nothing about surveillance and certainly nothing about domestic surveillance. So, given that those arguments don't really hold much water, what might their real motivations be? Well, one of them might be that they're carrying out the sort of surveillance that's so broad that it could never fit into the parameters of an ordinary warrant. If they're trying to listen to every phone conversation of every American or analyze certain aspects of them to see if there are patterns that indicate terrorist activity, or if they're trying to read everyone's email using computers, well, that sort of thing is just too broad to fit into the ordinary warrant process. But there's also a more sinister explanation. It may be the case that they're trying to listen in on conversations that even conservative FISA judges wouldn't allow them to do. So for instance, if they're seeking to listen to conversations of journalists with their sources or conversations of attorneys with their clients, that sort of thing would never be authorized by the FISA court, and it has the same sort of potential to undermine our system of government and our democracy that President Nixon's surveillance of his political opponents had.